perfect. Huh? What's happening? Yes. Huh? Nothing. Well, the camera's off. Do you want it to be on? And then when I leave. How's it? Good.
Okay, I'm gonna please.
Yes. The what? AEL. Pressed.
What button did you press when?
Nothing.
That's what moved. How? Because it's the way that it's set up.
Also, you're not going to be able to
I
see
see that's being used as a thing. I don't know what I'm doing.
Where are these kids?
How about now? Okay, cool. C1. Someone needs to man this camera. I want to go to the bottom.
Clarence. Clarence. Should not make it autofocus. I think it does have autofocus. I don't know. Ella. Huh? Clarence. Yo.
Zoom.
That was very slow. Focus, focus.
Yeah?
What do you need? Is it gone? Is it gone? Okay. Okay, whatever you like.
Inga. Is it now? No, 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 no. Like, is that other level showing? And now?
Hi guys, I think we can start finding our seats. So everybody outside that's busy at the coffee station can just make their way to the auditorium. You know what? I think we'll just get started. So I am Marlon Brunt. I'm the news manager for the UCT Radio. We are lucky enough to be in the presence of three wonderful, strong, independent women. We've got Martha Evans. She is a lecturer in journalism and media studies at the University of Cape Town. She's the author of Broadcasting the End of Apartheid and Speeches That Shaped the South Africa. Martha also worked as a writer and editor for several South Africa's top authors, bringing a wealth of insight into how media shaped our national story. Then we have Tara. Tara is a political analyst and parliamentary correspondent for Business Day. She holds a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics and has written for the United Nations. Tara is also a recipient of the Ubuntu Youth Diplomacy Award and from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. And she's 20? 21.
Wow, Tara.
I just had to mention that. And then we have Alette Law from the Daily Maverick. She is currently working as the head of audience development at the Daily Maverick. Alette holds multiple degrees in philosophy, journalism, and political communication from the University of Cape Town, Stellenbosch, and London School of Economics. Her work focuses on understanding how audience engage with digital journalism in today's fast-changing landscape. Okay, so how we will run the discussion today is I'll ask one general question, and then I'll go into your specific questions for each person in their niche, if you will. Okay, so the general introductory question is, how do journalists balance speed and accuracy in the 24-hour news cycle?
I think you should start.
Audible.
Yes.
Is it?
Hello?
It's
What's
on.
green?
It's green.
Oh. I'm clearly this journalist is not very tech savvy.
Let me just. Sorry. Technical difficulties.
There we go. There we go.
There we go. Yay.
It is extremely difficult. It is a skill that you learn. So right now, I am covering the ad hoc committee on allegations made by Journal Mkhunazi. And so the longest day I've had this week is like 18 hours in Parliament, and you just need to sit and write. So there's two kinds of ways that you cover something when you, or at least from my perspective, when we're doing parliamentary committees. So I take my notes is that we're very thankful for technology, but now when you record, I do it on my iPad mostly. It gives you the transcript of everything saying. And then the key thing is to just take live notes. I find that writing helps me the best instead of typing, because I type a bit slower. And then you go back to your transcript, you see what is relevant. But it's very important to go into a parliamentary committee from my perspective, where you're knowing the background and the context and the story that I want to write and the narrative that you want to develop. And every publication covers something different. So you'll find that News 24 likes to do a broad scope of the main news story. I work for the Business Day. We are a finance and economics-based paper. And so our readership really just wants to know about the numbers. How much does something cost? How is this going to affect the budget? Looking at that kind of like broader financial scope. So it does depend on the news that you're writing. A very, very big thing from my perspective. So I have a background in research. I got into media in a very roundabout way because I worked in Parliament in the research department first. So a big thing when you're covering something, specifically relating to government, is to have a big understanding about the Constitution, the bills that they're talking about in committee, to make sure that everything that you write is fact-based. That's kind of my perspective on it.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have any?
So I can't really talk about it from the perspective of what I always call a working journalist, which is this term that sort of, I always think of like a working horse, a cart horse or something. They're actually at the coalface doing that kind of work. But I have had students doing research into journalism as an industry, and and I also obviously know a lot of journalists. And I mean, some of them are really struggling with the sort of denuded newsroom and fewer copy editors or journalists working in the newsroom. So they're really struggling with that. So I can't say how they necessarily cope with it, but I do think sometimes there's a lot of recycled information that I see from a reader's perspective, and articles that are clearly churned out rather quickly, journalism as it's called. So I think journalists are struggling with that, and one of my students did a really interesting research study into broadcast journalists and how they spoke about social media and how it was both something that helped because it provided sources, information, but it was also kind of exploding what was expected of them as, whereas previously they'd simply been needed to report, and that was all that they had to do. They now have to enhance their story, connect with their readers. They have to become marketers. They have to become fact checkers as well, because of course the possibility for misinformation to creep into what they're dealing with is much higher. And it was a really interesting study because all of them spoke about social media as this beast. So I can speak about it from that perspective. How they do it on a day-to-day basis, I don't know. I take my hat off to you.
Yeah, I think also just to add quickly, because I'm also not at the coalface, and I know it's really hard for journalists to do that. A lot is expected of them on a day-to-day basis. But from a newsroom perspective, I think you have to decide how important speed is for you. Do you want to be first with the news? If that is your niche, like something like News 24, then you have to have systems and processes in place to support journalists who want to do that, and formats, right? So and you're not going to be first with an in-depth analysis within half an hour of a breaking story, right? You're going to have a short snippet on it. That's your niche, then that's fine. But if that's not your niche, you don't have to be first. And I think that's where Daily Maverick is a little bit more lucky. There is time to do the quality checks and to do the deeper level of reporting. And it doesn't have to be a trade-off. I mean, you have to understand why people come to you. Why do people read you? It's not necessarily to always have the first take. It might be, to get the second take and the analysis. And, you have to balance those two.
So basically what you're saying is quality over quantity in terms of speed.
Yes, well, if you're about a quality project, then yes.
Okay. I will just get into your question. So Daily Maverick operates successfully without a paywall. How has your team managed to thrive financially while keeping journalism freely accessible?
So thrive is a very strong word. We survive. It's really tough. So we don't have the paywall, which is what a lot of most reputable news sites now have a paywall with good reason, and I think it's a good model. I used to work at News 24. Well, I was actually part of the team that launched the paywall there, so I think that's a good model. But the trick is, and I think that goes for everyone, regardless of whether you have a paywall or not, we are in a space where we just constantly need to be innovating with different revenue streams. There's just no way that sticking to the old way of depending on advertisers to keep your business alive will sustain you into the future. So we experiment a lot. We try to innovate a lot with different revenue streams, but we have managed to diversify quite a bit. We still have advertising as one of our core income streams, but we also have our membership program. We do events and webinars, and we get great sponsors for those. It's a constant battle, and I think we're definitely not alone in that.
Okay. I think it's a constant concern, especially now with with social media, if journalists will be, if they should have more than one job. So do you believe investigative and long-form journalism can still survive online, given the short attention spans and social media platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely a place for that. Again, it's maybe a little bit more about experimenting with the format of your investigative work. I'm sure you all saw the video we did, the Bride video, which was really a way to experiment, but it's also, with the format, we find that with because we are known for our long-form journalism, we do have to experiment with that format. So in that case, we did the video part of it, but it was tagged onto the long story. But we find that what works really well with longer pieces is to talk people through exactly how we did it and be really transparent about how the story came about, what the journalists had to do to get the story, and really take readers along on that journey. And it's something that's kind of shifted in the way how we present that investigative work, because we're very much aware of the fact that people have short attention spans these days. We also put out a summary alongside the story for people who don't want to read the whole thing. We might make a video version of that same story, put that out on social media to reach a different audience there. So it is about experimenting with formats. But the content itself, that's not going anywhere, and that's just even more important than ever, I think. We are inundated with AI slop and, and disinformation, and that type of information and journalism that really drills down into very important issues and expose very important issues for people. That's not going anywhere. That's just getting more important.
I think that's something that Daily Maverick does very well, and I have to commend you guys on that, is that future forward way. I mean, I love your reels, and it's very, I can engage, it's digestible. So yeah, I have to commend you guys on that one. And then we're going to go to Tara Ruiz. Yeah. So you report on some of the most politically charged issues in South Africa. How do you maintain objectivity and integrity when covering topics that divide public opinion?
I think it's just about staying true to your core. So there's this thing in like journalism called editorializing, where you like give your opinion on a certain topic. And so until I started my job now at the Business Day, I never reported the news before ever. I wrote a column, an opinions column for News 24, and then I would like ad hocly write opinions for like other newspapers. But I'd never reported the news a day in my life, and I didn't study journalism. Like I had no background in journalism whatsoever. And so when I started this job, it was a big learning curve about like how to accurately report the news, how to not look into something deeper. Like you learn very quickly that you're not supposed to sit on something and idealize about like what could happen in the future, what could this certain political decision lead to. So that's a big thing that I've had to learn. I also think for me, I have a very unique perspective, having worked in Parliament and now writing about Parliament. And you learn very quickly that there are two different sides to politicians. There is the side that you see behind closed doors, and like you'll see them in the hallways of the precinct, and then there's like when the cameras are on and we're in committee and they put on a persona. And so I think that's what's really helped me to be like, these are individual people, and I've written things that have upset politicians many, many times, and then they like don't take it personally, and they just, some do, but for the most part, I think there's a clear distinction between a politician and their actions as an individual and them in their, I like to say they're putting on a show and the decisions that they make.
Okay. Having appeared on platforms like Lester Kibitz and Sizwe Mfuwash, sorry, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, shows, how do you think podcasting offers political journalism a new kind of freedom?
I definitely think it helps younger generations, specifically Gen Z, relate to the news more. So like, I get people come up to me all the time, and it's usually if it's like older, like 30 and above. Like I know that they know me from reading my work, so they like read my blog, or they like read the Business Day. And like under 30, it's just like they know me from social media. And a lot of people don't know that like writing is my full-time job. They think because I do a segment on Cape Talk and then I have a podcast on Cape Talk, they think that that is like my full-time job. It's not. I'm a writer, and they're quite shocked. And I'm like, I write for a print newspaper. But I think that it's really about broad appeal. We're talking about paywalls. So the Business Day, we do have a paywall. We're like infamously like the most expensive out of all of the newspapers. But we do that because we do have a upper LSM market, and then I think that alternative media really does, and it gives you as a platform the opportunity to appeal to more people, even if they can't pay for that content. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of corporate baddies are reading your guys' paper, you know what I'm saying? So they can afford.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go to Martha. You've been training journalists for years now. Do you think the next generation still sees journalism as a calling or more of a content career?
It's interesting because we have, schools of young wannabe journalists, content creators who come through, and there's always within each class there's always somebody who just has that calling. It's innate in them. So, for example, we had students doing SRPs a couple of years ago, and lots of them were doing stuff about marine environmentalism, and they did, and many of the students, they want the skills of how to make things look good, and they want to know how to use a camera, how to really take a good photograph, and they get lost in this sort of making things look good. And I think this is something to do with social media and the way that we consume so much social media. They get lost in wanting to acquire those skills, and they forget about what the public interest is. They want to make the public interested, but they forget what the actual core public interest is. So we had a group, and they did a fantastically beautiful documentary on Sealand. I don't know if it's a brand that produces stuff out of recycled marine material, and it was beautifully done. They'd gotten drones, and they'd done amazing stuff. And then we had this one quirky guy in the class who had pitched. He wanted to do his SRP on a senior research project on load shedding, which was a big issue at the time. And it wasn't such a sexy topic to some of the students. Anyway, he ended up doing his SRP on that, and he ended up having a Zoom recording interview with Andre de Ruyter. He managed, and he's now working as a journalist, so he's definitely got that in his heart. And so many of the students do go off, and they do become content creators, but there are many different avenues for journalistic pursuits. So some of them will go and work for organizations like Africa Check, which is not a newspaper, but it's still doing work in the realm of journalism, or they'll go and work for NGOs, for equal education, and they're still producing content that is, visual storytelling or journalistic in some sense, but from an advocacy perspective. The straight reporters, straight reporting is rare, finding students that go into that. And your journey is quite an unusual one. In the past, you would begin in the newsroom, you'd have a beat, you'd go and do, typically they'd start you out in court reporting, and that's where you'd start. And you'd end up and you'd get to sort of 40, and then maybe they'd let you tamper with opinion. And that's kind of changed now. Everybody, I think journalists who are straight reporters also write opinion analysis, and the Daily Maverick is more of an analytic, you do more analysis and investigative journalism than straight reporting. So there are always a few students who have that quality in them, but many of them go into different fields. And I try also to create an excitement about doing that kind of work as well. But
And just add on to that, there's also fewer jobs in
fewer
straight
jobs,
journalism, right? So
Yeah.
there are fewer options for people who want to go into it, which is sad, but that's unfortunately the reality. So a lot of people who might want to go into that type of straight journalism end up having to do something else because there just aren't that many opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a big concern amongst the dreamers, if you will. And that's why I'm saying they tend to have more than one. So what do you call a jack of all trades type of approach to their career? Another thing for Martha, what challenges do you face in preparing students for a newsroom environment that's constantly shifting between print, digital, and broadcast formats?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge challenge, and our journalism program has changed over the years. We used to have things very segmented, where we'd have a print production program, we'd have a digital media program, a broadcast, and now it's kind of merged into multimedia journalism. And so we end up producing what they were speaking about in the previous panel discussion about, somebody who's multi-skilled, but it always worries me that they're not specializing in any single particular field. So they might come up, knowing how to use a camera and put a story together, but they're not particularly good at either of those things because we haven't got the time with them. Plus the platforms are changing all the time, so we start teaching them using some openware software to teach them something, and then suddenly you need the premium version for this to become something that works still, and so we have to shift. So I think we're constantly having discussions about this and thinking, what are the core skills, values that we can teach students that we want them to leave the university with. We also want them to have those digital skills, the skills that they use creating tools, but there are other skills that are timeless, that are the same as the skills that were being taught many, many years ago. And so we focus on those. Ethics, witnessing, quoting, interviewing, those skills are not going to change.
Okay.
The soft skills, I suppose.
Yeah. I have to also mention, I think that we tend to forget at the university level that your colleagues are in your classroom. Like,
Yes.
I think that's also a skill because I do not, speak to my classmates, but at the end of the day, it's possible building connections. But anyway, sorry.
Well, teamwork is a big part of
Yeah.
is a big part of working as a journalist. And one of the things that's really sad is, you know, a lot of the journalists I know work from home. There isn't that newsroom space. They used to come together and bounce ideas off each other. So that's, I think, a real, you know, effect of COVID and you know, and the economic state of the newsroom, which is a tricky one. I mean, it's great you can work from home,
Yeah.
but there's a
At what
downside.
cost? Yeah. I think I'm going to go to another general question just to break it up. How has the rise of AI and automation changed the nature of news reporting? Did I already ask that question? No, okay. How has the rise of AI and automation changed the nature of news reporting or simply the tools of journalists use?
I think
It's for you.
So I'm again quite lucky in that I only report on a very niche thing. I don't really do large scale. On occasion, I will write a news analysis, but like my niche is Parliament. I only write about Parliament, and we're very lucky. So in Parliament, there's something called the PGA, the Parliamentary Galleries Association, and so all of the writers who report on Parliament, we have offices in Parliament. We basically live there, and so I think I have it a little bit better than like an average journalist because you can't really type into ChatGPT, or at least I mean I'm very much anti-AI, but you can't say to ChatGPT, write about something that is happening right now, because ChatGPT waits for news articles to be put online and then takes the information from those articles and then formulates its own opinion. And so unless we as the journalists don't put our articles up, it's not going to know about something that is happening in a parliamentary committee in front of you right now. So thankfully in that sense, I do have some job security because ChatGPT needs my articles to yip it off. But I do think it's ever present. I think we'll sit in committee and we'll see MPs upload sensitive government documents, information that are embargoed, not even made available to the public, and put it up to spit out summaries to them, and that always really scares me. But yeah, I think it's very important for journalists to know exactly what you're talking about. I think a big thing is you'll find you as a journalist you need to read the news. I know that's a lot of journalists don't read the news. I have a friend who works in News 24, and he was telling me about they're doing annual reporting, and he told me that he doesn't need News 24 because he was like, why do you read the news? I am the news. Which is a funny joke. But I think a lot of journalists have that mindset, is that you don't need to constantly take in more information because you are reporting on the information, but it's very important to have background, context, understanding. Thankfully for me, I haven't worked in Parliament, I know you have something called the NA handbooks of the National Assembly Rules and Procedures, and everything that MPs do is basically grounded in that. And having a vast background and knowledge about that is something that has really helped me. But it really just depends on the type of reporter that you are. I think when you report on specific topics like the courts or Parliament or provincial government or city council, it's a lot easier than just being a general reporter.
Okay, thank you.
If I can just shortly add, we encourage our journalists to use AI tools to help them do research, for things like transcribing. It's a very useful time-saving tool. If you're interviewing someone and you have to go transcribe that, you can now transcribe that audio with AI. You all know. So it's useful for that. It's useful to generate ideas for stories, for infographics. If you have a massive report and you've worked through it, and you want to pull out some numbers of, to create infographics, it does that. There's so many things that you can do with it to enhance the work that you do. It doesn't replace the core of your job, the reporting part of it, but to assist you in research. And we tend to think about AI tools as things like ChatGPT and Gemini and Perplexity and all of those tools, and those are general LLMs, but you can build LLMs and things that are based on, for example, the Hansard, or and then query that for very specific things and get quality information from it, and you can still go and double check it and make sure the information is factual and correct. But to do that type of for someone who doesn't necessarily have the context and
Yeah.
the background, because that's a big problem in our industry, right? We don't have enough people to be experts in every field. So a journalist might be thrown into a story cold on any given day because someone's sick, or it's, you must just go to Parliament because there's an important story today.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have the background to do that research. It's incredibly helpful to have an AI tool that can help you do that and just give you the lowdown. Doesn't mean you're, compromising on accuracy. You're still going to double check things. But yeah, we do encourage people to use it to make their jobs easier.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, someone was saying earlier, what keeps you up at night, and it is for a university lecturer, AI is also something that we want our students not to fall behind. So we want to understand how to teach them to use the tool responsibly, but at the same time maintain the integrity of what they produce and learn. So, I mean, AI, from my granted limited experience of it, is really great at helping writers, write in that journalistic economic style that is quite difficult for young students to grasp. In fact, if you put a lot of news reports through those AI detection tools, which is probably what I've used more than AI generative tools, is trying to see if someone's used AI in their assignment. A news report will often come up and say that it's AI generated when I know that it's not, because the language is so formulaic. And I think using AI for something that smooths over stylistic issues or helps you to report better or to report more closely aligned with the style of the paper or the outlet or whatever you're writing for, I don't really see a problem with that. But it's never gonna be able to do the kind of witnessing the breaking news aspect of things. So I think it's getting that balance between using AI ethically, responsibly, but it's not generating information, but that it helps you to curate and make your what you've already created more easily digestible for audiences. Yeah.
I think enhancing what you've done, yeah. I feel that I agree with all of you in that if you don't keep up, you'll be left behind, essentially. So, yeah, I agree with AI. I think we should keep the integrity as well, yeah. And then okay, we'll go to Alette again. In the digital age, audience engagement is key. How do you balance giving readers what they want and maintaining editorial independence?
I think you have to know your audience really well, and that's something that works to our benefit in digital publishing, because we do have analytics. We can see exactly who's reading us, and then understanding what the needs of that audience are helps you engage with them much better, obviously. And then it doesn't have to be we do public service journalism. There's only so much clickbait you can do in public service journalism. It's not always very sexy. In fact, it very rarely is. So it isn't necessary. I don't like to think of it as a trade-off between giving people what they want and doing what we feel is important. I know that there's always that debate about how much sugar do you give with your vegetables, but it's about knowing your audience and understanding their needs and writing for that needs and tailoring your engagement efforts, whether that's on social media or on your site or in your newsletters or whatever channels you use. When you know what it is that your audience really come to you for and what they really need from your work, then it becomes easy. It's not a trade-off. It's really just servicing the needs of your readers.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Cool. So we have to wrap up in 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask one more short question for each. I think it can be like rapid fire. And then we can go to the audience. What gives you hope about the future of journalism?
Students.
Students, okay.
The work that students produce is, every year. I ran a great narrative literary journalism course at honours level, and it's always an absolute delight to see what students, and it's a slow journalism course where they really do something they're never going to be able to do in their lives again, where they can research something really, really deeply and write about it. And the stories that they come up with, it's incredible. But I mean, there's a lot of fantastic investigative journalism in the country as well. Ground Up, is doing great work. So there's a lot of hope, despite the fact that you've got the Sunday Times struggling and the Mail and Guardian isn't what it is. It's popping up in other different places and manifesting differently.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm hopeful about journalism because I think the need for it is going to become just so much bigger in this world that we live, that we're, as I said, the proliferation of sources is just massive, and you don't know what you can trust anymore, what's real and what's AI generated. If you are a journalist or you work for a news organization who's known for credible, authentic, real journalism, that's going to be such a valuable asset. And I think people are going to start seeking it out more and more as it becomes more confusing and, especially with the AI stuff that we're seeing out there. So I'm hopeful. I think there's always going to be a future for journalism. I think how we produce it, the formats, how we work in collaboration with AI, that's going to change things massively. It already is, and it's, as you say, if we're not going to adapt with it, we are going to be left behind. But I think there's a very exciting future ahead of us.
Okay.
I definitely think young people still being interested in journalism and wanting to become journalists is definitely very helpful. You see a lot of people almost opting out of certain careers, and journalism is one of them. So I think that's also really important to constantly have young voices come in and fresh perspective and fresh ideas.
Okay. Thank you. And then my last question, you can add one word or just complete the sentence. The future of journalism is?
Students. Curiosity. Curiosity.
Okay.
Digital. The future of journalism is digital, definitely.
I'm going to steal a word from one of the previous panelists and say human.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to go to the audience's questions. Are we?
All right.
Oh, there.
This is based on, is it on? Yeah. This is based off a conversation we had last night, and Sean spoke about it, about so maybe Alette, this is for you, investigative journalists doing a lot of work, and then you have someone, a podcaster, that breaks it down in 2 minutes. How do you deal with that? But then at the same time, I really enjoy Marianne Tam and her breakdown of her stories. How do you convince your journalists to get on camera and tell stories, I'm assuming they're writers, and tell stories in really entertaining ways that grabs our attention? It's really boring. It's about the gift registry,
Yeah.
Just talk
I
about the
think
process.
some journalists are naturally more open and inclined to do stuff like that. Like, she's a natural entertainer, so she loves doing it. So, you always start with your friendlies or your early adopters for that type of thing. It isn't an interesting thing with people aggregating your news, essentially, the podcasters or social media influencers. On the one hand, it's amplifying your journalism, so it's something that aids us in that sense. On the other hand, you do feel a little bit like we did all the work and you're getting it out. But then you have to ask yourself again, what is your niche and who's your audience? We don't have Dan Corder's audience. So we're not going to reach them with our, if we did the same thing, you know, we're not going to, and that's also not our strength. Our strength is in producing the journalism. So do we want to go dabble in doing that as well? Not really. That's not our primary audience. It's not, we don't have the resources for it. So let Dan do that for us. And, you know, we still, our work is still amplified. And that's, at the end of the day, really all that matters to us. Yeah, getting that journalism out there.
It would be great if you paid you a small fee as well.
It would be great if you paid us a small fee, but don't be greedy.
Can I follow up? Because I was going to ask something similar. Because we were talking about last night. Hi. So is there a risk that then good investigative journalism is eroded because the resources dry up? Because it's the faces and the newscasters, newsfluencers who are actually getting the attention rather than the people doing the work breaking those stories. So, like, how does the industry adapt to that when, like you say, the resources are already at risk?
Yeah, I mean, that is the whole reason we're in the trouble that we are, right? Our income has been eroded by the big tech platforms. Advertisers go to Google and Facebook because they know that that's where the audiences are. So they advertise there instead of investing in local platforms like our news publishers and, you know, wherever else. And the reason they go there is because the people that are there, you know, and the influencers are there now, so they are, and they're making money on it. But that's not trickling down to us, right? So that is the whole challenge. How do we make money while producing something that is very easy for other people to benefit from in that way, but it costs us a lot of money to produce. And that's what, you know, what I said right at the start. We're constantly in a space where we have to innovate to find different and diverse income streams, because, you know, even if we did decide to, social media isn't a benefit, isn't a profitable income for us because we don't own that audience. The profit goes to Meta. You know, if Marianne's videos are fantastic for amplifying our brand and our work, but we don't make anything from that. At the base, we hope that people learn about Daily Maverick and they eventually become readers and they eventually become Maverick insiders who support us financially. So it is very difficult. I mean, I don't have an answer for you. The answer is we struggle because journalism costs a lot of money to produce, especially good and investigative journalism. That investigation that Peter Louis did, just the legal fees cost us 250,000 Rand. And it's not something we budget for. So, yeah, it's really tough.
I had a question for Tara.
Yeah.
You know, in the political ferment at the moment, whether it's the States or South Africa, there's a lot of, it's a very sort of divisive and quite lively space. And I think one of the frustrations I often find when I watch, especially independent media, is you kind of want journalists to hold politicians' feet to the fire sometimes. In those moments where, you know, as you said earlier, when they put on the mask. Like, do you have that sense sometimes as a journalist that, of like the burning question if you were just one-on-one in a room, like, and the person has to answer, what were the questions you'd ask? I mean, as a journalist, you talk about reporting on what you're seeing, for example, in the commission that's happening now, but you must be sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I could ask that question, and I wish I could, like, instead of just getting a bullshit answer, I wish I could push and get them to answer, like, properly. Like, it must be a kind of a frustration when you know, especially having worked there, like, what is actually going on. So, I mean, how do you, is that something that maybe tempts you to incorporate that into your own writing, or are you thinking, like, these are the questions that should be asked of these characters? No one else is asking them. It could be me.
I do think journalists have a lot more, at least in sitting in the parliament, journalists have a lot of influence about what happens in parliament. So MPs have something called questions, where, so as a journalist, I could ask a politician a question, I could ask a minister, anyone a question, and they could lie to me with a pure face and just be like, oh, they were lying by omission. But MPs have something called written questions, where they can write to various, they write to the executives, so various government departments, and they can subpoena records. And you as journalists, we've done this before, is like you can ask a political party or an MP you write the question for them and they send it through, because like if they lie to the member of parliament, it's perjury. So they can't do that. So that's also a big thing about how we uncover what is happening in Parliament. We also get access to all the answers to the questions. So it's about going through that and really trying to dig through the information. Have I ever thought that I could ask questions while sitting in committee? 1,000%. Like now that the ad hoc committee has been happening, like I remember the first day, all the political parties were attacking Diane Kilvana to say that she should be taken off the committee. The committee now needs to sit there and vote and be like, no, we need to have her removed. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, if you actually just read the National Assembly rules, you know that you can't do that. It's actually at the political party's discretion. And they sat there and went around in circles for an hour until someone was like, oh no, we need to consult the legal team and get a legal opinion. We then adjourned for a break while they went to go and consult the legal team and then came back. And I was like, an hour and a half of my life, like flashed before my eyes. And like, I wish I could just put my hand up and be like, you can't do that. The National Assembly rules don't say that. So there are instances like that where I'm just like, I wish I could. Or like ask a real question, I think. Specifically now, so how the ad hoc committee is split up is you have the witness testimony one day and then MPs get a cross-examine the next day. I have so many questions I would have loved to ask General Mkunazi. We saw testimony from Fani Masemola yesterday. I'm just like, these members of parliament are not asking the right questions. You can definitely steer them in the right direction and like be like, I think you should ask this question. I think you should, my humble suggestion. And so you definitely do have a lot of influence and power, and I think coming from working in research in Parliament to now being on the other side, is that every MP reads every single thing that we write. So we as the PGA have that, we do have a lot of influence in terms of the MPs want to know what our perceptions of them are and how that is influencing the readers. And so you'll find that certain MPs will divulge a lot more information than they should because they really want to contribute to shaping that narrative and perspective. But yeah, I do, you do see a very different side to politicians. And people find it quite odd when I'm just like, yeah, no, you said you have lunch with them. Because we all, in Parliament, there's catering, that's where your tax money goes. So we said we have lunch with them, we talk to them, you'll find a lot of chief whips specifically will come to the journalists and be like, what's your opinion on this? How do you see this? So it's also about having that responsibility as a journalist to know that you can shape their perceptions and the decisions that they make as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you reconcile media with AI, or generative AI, which can sometimes have a plagiaristic nature, and not all readers understand how generative AI works? So, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you maintain trust from your readers if you also embrace AI usage in media?
So I think there's a big difference between using AI generatively and using AI as a tool. Using AI, and I'm speaking as a university lecturer here, it's really very obvious to us when students or colleagues sometimes have used, or anyone has used AI generatively. There's a flatness to the writing. There's, I can kind of tell almost immediately. I think I can. But using it as a tool to summarize in order to get a better understanding of something before you start writing your content is very different to using it to generate your content, or writing your content and then using AI to help you perfect your content is very different to using it generatively. So that's, from my perspective,
Yeah, and I also think, where you do use it, you need to be transparent about it. You need to tell your audience that you used AI and that you used it in this manner. But it is also about the tool. For example, we have, on our site, we have our article, and then you can toggle to a summary version of that article, which is AI generated. But it wasn't ChatGPT that generated it. It's our own built-in AI tool trained on Daily Maverick's content and checked by an editor before published. So it's a summary of the story, so it's obviously it can't hallucinate things in there and write it differently, and then an editor still checks it. So I don't think if you are generating AI and without a human in the loop, just publishing it, you're not doing journalism. You're doing AI generated fluff, whatever. Sorry, I'm very critical of that. If you use it, it has to be checked by a human. It has to be disclosed. You have to be transparent about it, and you have to guide your journalists as well in terms of what they can and cannot do with it. You can't just write your whole story with ChatGPT. You can't even write parts of it without disclosing it, at least to your editors, so that they can disclose it to your audience or whatever the case might be. So I think there's a lot of training that will still need to be done about ethics, the ethical use of AI in newsrooms, what you can and cannot do, as well as the tools that you build into your systems and the checks to build into your system to make sure that whatever you do publish, it doesn't erode the trust from your audience and the credibility of your work.
Okay, thank you. That's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for taking the time to guide us through, this. Okay. Thank you.
One, two. Hi, before we start the next panel, we're just going to allow for 5 minutes of break so that the next panel members can get mic'd up. So just 5 minutes, and latest 1:45 we'll start. And also,
Yes, yes.
Like, not too close. Not too.
Okay. Alrighty, we're gonna get started with the next panel. So if everyone can make their way in and take their seats, thank you.
On this.
Oh, too close to.
And he's the.
Okay, while Nomandla is being mic'd up, lunch will happen after this. If the conversation happens to go a bit over time, please don't kill us. We'll still have a good lunch afterwards. I think that's going to be around about quarter to two or around about half past one, quarter to two, around there. Half past one. Okay, there we go. Okay, while we start, I'll introduce our panel members. My name is Clarence Ndini, and I am, I guess, someone in the film industry. I'm in between places right now. I'm still a student, but in the film industry, like as a very entry level. So I thought it fit that we have this discussion with people who are solidified in their in the film industry. So we have got Sean Drummond right there on that side. He's a screenwriter and producer for the BFAT Motel film company. That is BFAT, that's BEFAT. PHAT Motel Film Company. And next to Sean right there, we've got Dr. Ian Resdick. He's a senior lecturer at the CFMS, that is the Center of Film and Media Studies in UCT, and he's also a director of the African Cinema Unit. And being mic'd up, we've got Nomandla Vilagazi, who is a recent master's graduate at UCT for documentary filmmaking. I think it's MODA. Is it still called MODA? Master of Documentary Arts. She is also an award-winning documentary filmmaker for her film An Ode to Sarah. And next to Nomandla, we've got Leonora D'Souza, who is a director of events and film at the City of Cape Town. We good? So just to open up this discussion, I want to ask these four panel members, it's an open question. Basically, South Africa, or South African studios and productions are reaching global audiences such as Netflix and HBO and all the likes. So the question will be, with the ever-changing global politics, we know that Trump set these new tariffs for the entertainment industry. Will that momentum that we're seeing kind of dwindle, or will it be affected by these tariffs?
Hi, everybody.
You're a filmmaker.
Yeah. Look, Trump does a lot of things that aren't particularly well considered, and I think the tariffs are a good example of that. And I think, honestly, we don't know yet what they're going to do to the film industry, because there are so many moving parts when it comes to film production. The tariffs are on products, essentially. You can't tariff services, and when you're outsourcing production, in South Africa we service a lot of projects, especially in Cape Town, so they'll shoot One Piece here, or Raised by Wolves, or a million Resident Evil films for some reason. So you can't tariff services that are being provided production-wise. From a licensing and sales point of view, I guess there's a danger that we get tariffed, but then again, a lot of our sales are done to subsidiaries of global companies that don't base themselves in America. So Netflix is African, the EMEA office, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, is actually based in Amsterdam. So in short, I think we don't know. I understand why he's doing it from a point of view, is that they're trying to bring production back to LA and to the States specifically, which is its own economic can of worms, and not to untangle. And the reason productions go overseas is because you get more bang for your buck, and there are incentives and tax rebates and all sorts of things. And we used to have a very solid rebate incentive here, where the DTI would actually give productions a portion of their budget back for coming to shoot here, which stimulates jobs creation, attracts business in, and so ultimately is good for the economy. The DTI is in pretty shaky shape right now, which we don't need to talk about because it's probably a whole different conversation. But the reason producers go overseas is because they want to get the most bang for their dollar, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to shoot it in the States. A film like One Battle After Another, which just came out, was one of the few films lately to shoot in LA, and the production budget was $150 million, which it's a great film, but it shouldn't have been that for that film. Great for the local LA economy, probably not a great financial decision for the filmmakers, because that film's not going to make its money back. All of this is a long-winded answer saying nobody really knows anything, ever. And so I don't know. Yeah.
Mr. Leonora, I actually want you to just feed off on that, because you are in charge of the events and film that take place in Cape Town, all the productions that take place in Cape Town.
So I just want to place in perspective when we talk about job creation and injection into the economy. When we did a study in 2017, the study came back and said we do 0.05% of international work in Cape Town. That brought in over 3.5 billion. So we had this whole aim of pushing that up to 1%. And then imagine how much jobs that will actually support. So we estimate, and we're busy with our final studies now, between 20 and 25,000 jobs, depending on the film industry directly. And then obviously the trickle-down effect that this industry has into hospitality and everything else. So this is a very, very big and important industry. But the challenge at the moment really isn't Trump. At the moment. It's our own internal makings. It's our own mistakes. And the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry, I think, Sean, it's important that they understand this also, is because this industry needs incentives. And it needs incentives. Our incentive scheme comes from national. And that's been stalled for how many years now?
Like 4
years. So we've seen the amount of jobs, the big international jobs, that's been lost to our territory. We did an analysis out of 25 different territories, Estonia, Prague, everybody else, to actually see why are people going there, why aren't they coming here? And it is about incentives. It's a real problem. Cape Town, South Africa's got the best crews. We are talented. We are so, we've got everything. We've got the best air to shoot in, all of that. But we have to be competitive. And we're problem there.
Yeah, I mean, I did research for an interview on Clarence Ford's show earlier this year when the first round of so-called tariffs against films came out, and the two things there, firstly, were the potential threat would be that major companies that are planning shoots might delay them because they're waiting to see what happens. As Sean says, no one really knows. But again, what came out of that process was the kind of introspection from South African producers was actually, as you say, the bigger problem was ours. It was DTI related. It was issues around quite specific regulatory issues within South Africa. And yes, there might be a big knock-on if like a major film production like an Avengers or something doesn't come, that'll probably get into the news, like into the trade news, but the ultimate impacts can be relatively small compared to that. And I would also add that my short answer would be no impact, because there's so much more local stuff that's happening. Like filmmakers are still making amazing films. We've got students, I mean, one of my former students had a film in Venice that had zero like relationship to like overseas tariffs and everything else. And he's not interested in getting a US market for that film anyway, you know. So I think there is a sense where the diversification of film production and platforms makes it's not an eggs in one basket situation, which it may have been maybe 10 or 15 years ago.
Nomandla, so this conversation has reminded me of like my honors documentary. We focus on the large majority of the youth is wanting to leave South Africa. They don't want to create here anymore. And is now, as a recent graduate, how do you plan, like how do you feel about basically like this pressure of creating for local audiences and also for global audiences?
I think for me, the part that scares me within the film industry that I see a lot of young people fall into the trap of is that trap of poverty porn and appealing to one idea of African society, African life and lived experience. For me, I find that just it brings an incentive to the international parties to really look at Africa and be like, these are the types of stories that are coming out and these are the types of stories that we should be sharing. But there's so much diversity within South African youth just alone, besides across the continent as well, that involves so much complexity and like multiplicities of people's lived experience. So for me, I think what I always try to do as a young filmmaker myself is really centralize my story, keep it local as possible, and the right audiences will receive that story.
The right audiences will receive that story. And I think I'm going to jump to you, Sean. You've taken films now to the international audiences. We know Five Fingers went very global. What can you say has changed in terms of storytelling, in terms of funding, in terms of distribution, compared to like a local and international audience?
I think the biggest single change is probably the streaming age and the fact that your Netflixes are here now, who've become in a very short amount of time arguably the biggest producer or biggest spender for local, and I'll use the word content with Netflix, even though I generally don't like using the word because we didn't get into this industry to make content. But, you know, that is a built-in global audience that is hungry for South African shows, films, and you see us regularly break into the top 10 on Netflix. I write a show called Unseen on Netflix, which has done really well, not only South Africa with a global audience, too. Heart of the Hunter, which was a feature film that came out last year, went to the #1 in the global audiences. And so I think there's an opportunity there for filmmakers to make work that is seen by a huge audience. I do think that, not that it's a double-edged sword, but Netflix is a platform that makes a very specific type of work. What hasn't really changed, apart from COVID, which knocked us for a while, was sort of 10 years ago, around about the time Five Fingers went out on the festival trail, every major film festival had South African films regularly, yearly. And we were part of what, I mean, we like to call this, yeah. What we like to call the second or third Great. I know this is being live streamed, so let me not shout. Yeah, we were a particular wave. The late 2010s was a particular wave that we were part of, and we were all filmmakers who graduated way longer ago than I care to admit, because I was on UCT Radio 20 years ago, literally. And so we all graduated around about the same time. It was a wave of filmmakers who were putting films like, I think in that year it was Ingleba, it was Five Fingers, it was Norma 37, it was. And then COVID, and in South African cinemas, there were South African films releasing every week, at least one, of people were going to watch them. Films in South African cinemas were making millions of rands, which was also the cresting of sort of a long road that we'd taken to get there. COVID kind of destroyed the cinema industry, which is still one that's clambering to get back on its feet. Mayfok My Release, which came out a couple of weeks ago, was the first South African film to break R1 million in who knows how many years, which is great because we finally got there again. I've lost my train of thought. So I think what we're seeing right now with films like Ian's talking about Carissa, which was made by Devon and Jason, who I think were both South African, maybe Dudu was South African. The Heart is a Muscle. Two South African films that have been a festival trail this year. Laundry, which was a South African film, was just at Toronto. Street Trash, which is a very different type of film. It's sort of a splattergore horror film. That was at Rotterdam this year. So South African films are finding their way back into festivals again, and that's exciting because I think a healthy industry needs both those things. It needs millions of people watching very commercial shows and films that are made for a streaming audience. And it needs people going to festivals to watch great art that's being made by artist filmmakers out of the country. And I don't think the spirit of resilience in art in the South African industry can be that easily trodden on. I think it's a recovery period where we're remembering who we are as filmmakers now and as an industry, and I find that very exciting.
I just want to now just look at you, Ian, from an academic perspective. Sean mentioned like Netflix creates a specific type of content, and no matter you say the right audience will find the film. From an academic perspective, do you think we are actually using our own voices as South Africa? We are staying true to the South African voice or the South African narrative when we produce these global reaching films?
Short answer, yes. And I gave a presentation earlier this year, which I was going to publish and then didn't, but it was about advertising actually, and about how advertising narratives were so, South Africa's famous for its adverts. We have great advertising narratives that are fundamentally based on South African identity, like the KFC ads about the guys down on Marion Island, or so many. And so I posed the question then, it was a couple of months ago. It was in the wake of that Last Ranger being nominated for an Academy Award for short film. And I asked the question, like, what is the ideal storytelling form for South African filmmakers? And advertising, I think, is one of them. If we look at screen narratives beyond just movies, yes, I think there's a multiplicity of great South African storytellers telling stories in all these different ways, whether it's through Netflix, and that's not the only, Showmax. They're doing it through. I think YouTube is going to kill Netflix at some point. The YouTube platform's phenomenal, and if I survey my students, they all tell me they watch way more content on YouTube than anything else. So I think there's a debate to be had there about what those platforms really mean. I do think that certainly the storytelling, and I wrote about it in 2018 when I talked about like this post-democratic wave of filmmakers, which was like Jenna and Sean and Dylan Valley as a documentarian, and Sib Shongwela Meyer, who did Necktie Youth, and there's like multiple waves, and it's now much more. It's not like one or two waves, it's now just everywhere. Like it's a sort of tsunami in a way, because everyone's finding their feet in these different contexts. And that's really, really exciting. So, I think from that point of view, I'm sort of sharing Sean's positivity. I think my worries around the Netflix model, and I'm going to probably say something unpopular, but I was at a Netflix breakfast where, which is not about fiction, it was about documentary, where the Netflix person for Africa kind of said, we're not interested in environmental themes and in like social justice narratives, and like the whole room was full of people making environmental documentaries, social justice documentaries, and I was like, whoa, that was like, read the room, but that was their model. They say, we want celebrity, we want serial killers, we want like this. And so it was quite, in some ways, quite transparent and interesting to hear, but like that was the model, And I think there are plenty of people who are going to, I just wrote a piece on the Station Strangler documentary It's clearly popular. Showmax is making money out of it. Netflix is making money out of it. And those are good South African shows with good South African production companies, researchers, editors, writers. So there's definitely value in that stream. And by her own admission, she says Netflix, will change. Like in 2 years' time, maybe there will be a big push towards environment stuff that isn't there now. It's not that this is their plan forever. It's just in the moment, that's where the market is. So I do think there's a sense where our own identity will always, as Namanda says, we're going to make our own films. And it's perhaps, for those people wanting to make money, it's not comfortable to hear, well, you'll find your audience. But I think the audiences will be there. And I think there will be a pushback against, even in my son's generation, which is getting towards matric, there's a pushback against AI. They want more realism. They want more engagement with story. So maybe that's going to be the value for us, is that if I have a student saying, what story should I tell? I'm always going to say, well, tell the story you want to tell in your South African context. Don't be worried that it's not going to find a form, because it will. It just might not be the way you want it to, but it's going to be there. And Sean says, we're still, our films do well. For the kind of size of local industry we have, compared to other, I think we do well,
Nomandla, now, you are an independent filmmaker. So what's the biggest hurdle that you faced in trying to come up with South African stories, South African non-fiction stories into the global market?
Coming up with the stories. I think I've never really had a problem coming up with the stories. I have so many stories, and I think where I found my niche was in archival documentary storytelling. Archive is something that has just opened my eyes so much to South African life, historically and also into now, the things that were not obviously shown to us on SABC and all of that. So in my beginnings, I really got obsessed with District 6 and how District 6 itself is literally just like a utopia of South Africa, just the most beautiful mix of all these people and cultures and language and religion. And I realized that, because I watched The Last Supper on Horsley Street, which is a documentary talking about the forced removals in District 6. And upon watching that, I was just like, this is a narrative that needs to be shown again and retold through understanding District 6 now. There's people that are living there right now that are going to be, unfortunately, the next generation of forced removals because they are unhoused and homeless. So I think I've never struggled to find the story. South African life and culture is so rich that it's just always there. But I guess for my research, I went directly to my source, which is UCT. UCT was renaming Jamison Hall to Sarah Baartman Hall. And a lot of the kids still don't know who Sarah Baartman was. And that literally sparked, I think I'm like on my 4th year now of researching Sarah Baartman, digging into the archives through dusty newspapers and everything, and really seeing the wealth of story that we have to tell. My dad gives me a pitch of a documentary to tell every other week. Like last week was Jomo Sono. The richness is so there. So in terms of the hurdles, I guess it would be letting the international powers that be understand the true authenticity of telling this kind of story, and that it does need to be presented back to the South African people. As much as international fanfare is what we are after, and it is a measure of success, I do believe that centralizing our stories and centralizing our models of distribution is going to help young filmmakers feel empowered enough to say, like, oh yeah, I'm going to make my story about my auntie who sells dombolo on the corner. You know what I mean?
No, that's a very good
Jomo Sono would be a goodie.
It would.
Now, I want to open up this question, and maybe, Leonora, you can start answering this question, but what does the success look like in global distribution for South African cinema? Is it streaming deals, is it box office returns, or is it something deeper like cultural influence or representation?
So I'm going to let my colleagues take this one.
I'll jump on it. Can I have a bottle of water? Is that okay? My throat is just...
Oh, there you go.
So much. So it's an interesting one because I think about this a lot. And I was thinking about it in terms of it was the radio panel earlier, I think a conversation came up to do with revenue and the metrics around what is considered to be successful. And obviously being in the industry, I track a lot of industry podcasts and figures and facts and how much the conversation is reduced to the opening weekend. Is a film considered to be successful if it didn't make money? And bear with me because my brain is tangled and this is a tangled topic, but there are so many factors that go into making a film. Number one, how do you pay for it? You need investors. Okay, in South Africa, we've got a bit of a hybrid model where there's government grants or soft-ish money available, like the National Film and Video Foundation, which will put an amount of money into development and production of a film. It's never enough to get a film made, so then you go to market. Something like the DTI incentive would give you up to 50% of your budget if you qualify under certain categories. That, as we've said, is sort of off the table at the moment, which is really affecting South Africans' ability to make work. But then you have to go to market because you have to find investors who are willing to fund your film. And so sometimes you go into co-production with other countries, European countries, and there's soft money there you have access to. But ultimately, you're probably going to end up having to pay back a certain number of investors. So you have to be financially responsible in how you produce your work. So there's an obligation you to get those distribution deals, to sell to a streamer, to sell traditionally, which would mean you have a sales agent who goes to different countries, which are considered territories, and you sell to like the son of this distributor in America, and this distributor in France, and this distributor in South Korea, whatever the makeup may be, and slowly you piece together the revenue that ultimately like puts your film in the black. So there's a level of financial consideration, responsibility to be a good filmmaker in South Africa. So you have to take those things into consideration. However, there is also this idea that if the film doesn't make money, this is that more commercial studio sort of driven by Hollywood kind of model, that the film's got to make $1 billion, and if it doesn't, it's not considered success. Oh, Marvel's in crisis because the films don't make $1 billion anymore. Probably shouldn't spend $200 million making those films. But the fact that that's the first metric for success of a film, I find to be kind of challenging as a filmmaker, because as a producer, I'm also an artist. Five Fingers, I wrote and I produced, so those are two very different hats. As a producer, I go, ooh, I wish the film had made more money, because it's never going to make its money back. Despite the success, and despite us doing pretty well internationally, it's never going to make enough to pay back our investors. Luckily, they're all really proud of the film, because from an artist point of view, I'm really proud of the film we made. I'm proud of the reception. And I think the emphasis on whether a film makes a cultural impact, makes an audience impact, has something of value to put into the world, and is something people will still be talking about 5, 10, 20 years later.
Beyonce.
Like Beyonce. We'll be talking about her until the cows come home. We still consider films on Netflix. I'm watching films that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, because those films are part of the cultural lexicon of cinema. And as the artist, I want to make the films and the work that's going to be considered that people are still going to remember exist when I'm old, gray, and lamenting my days. So I think it's got to be both, is my short answer.
Can I jump in there from a completely non-film production point of view, from academic point of view? I remember years ago someone saying to me, the department had been teaching film for 5 years, and someone said, "Are you guys successful?" And I said, "Well, let's say we produce Oliver Hermanus, big celebrity director, who's done really well for himself, or Sean Drummond, and we say, these are our, the Martin Scorsese of NYU. NYU still dines out on the fact that Martin Scorsese was a graduate there in 1964. Okay, so if we say we've got these great iconic figures who've come out of the department, or I can say 80% of our graduates get jobs in the industry, which is the more successful model, and if you parlay that into a bigger picture, I remember someone years ago saying we should be more like Australia, and I'm saying why? Because we play rugby against them. It was the worst comparison in terms of film industries I could think of, and I thought we should be thinking more like Iran. Every time Abbas Kiarostami basically goes to the corner store for a coffee, he makes a movie about it and wins a Golden Palm. Iran was punching way above its weight in terms of its international profile based on the size of the industry, and because it had a lot of very, very significant figures doing really well in those kind of award ceremonies. And the kind of impact of a film like Tsotsi, for example, which did really well, not very well in Africa, didn't win awards on African, it was kind of met with a kind of meh response at FESPACO and other industries, but did well internationally. So, how you gauge success, who you really want to be successful with, who's the audience going to be for those films. So I think from Sean's point of view, it's got to be a broader metric than really, obviously, you can't keep making films for no money because you're going to run out of money to do it. And eventually even your most willing donors are going to give up the ghost, on that. But I do think, like, how we gauge success, and that thankfully we're not always based in this kind of brutal sort of Hollywood model, how we gauge success is a conversation that is really, really varied. It is about impact. It is about the long tail, like a film that has influence over time isn't just one that has influence in the moment. And I think that's how we need to look at success and influence much more.
And I just want to now move on to, again, I'm going to come back to you, Ms. Leonora. What's the city's biggest challenge in terms of like balancing the needs of local filmmakers and the demands of these big companies that come shoot here from international, the international companies?
So our office also runs the permitting section, the regulatory side of it. So we have a purview of all permit applications, whether it's commercials, whether it's long form or anything like other than the permits. There's no permits required for the studios itself. But for us, it's never going to be a challenge, this one versus that one. We try and be as enabling as is possible. So we even, with the difficulties we're finding at the moment, we're trying to open up as many locations as we can to permit as much as we can. But we've never had a situation where there's competition for space or competition for resources from the city side. In fact, we've just finalized a film strategy that looks at how we can, this industry's built itself organically, it's brilliantly been so, but I do think it is time for governments and for local governments to help enable and grow that. So one of the things that we're looking at is how can we develop the industry? How can we look at transformation, real transformation in the industry? How do we look at getting the people to market, helping people go to market, all of those things. So we're really trying as much as possible because we believe in this industry. We believe if this industry is nurtured enough, it's going to be one of the easiest industries to dial up, but it must be nurtured, it must be helped. So for us, it's never competition, Clarence. It's always about how do we make it happen.
So speaking about how do you make it happen, I can jump into Ian now. In terms of like now teaching students, basically from a university perspective, how can film schools adapt to prepare graduates for this new converged media landscape that we find ourselves in South Africa?
I think part of it is develop. So one of the things that is important, and something Devin actually said to me the other day, he said even though he'd been through production, the most valuable courses he did at UCT were the film theory and history courses, history of cinema, advanced film studies. He said, like, the production stuff you can learn, he says, but like being exposed to early cinema and French New Wave and Italian film and being exposed to, we still run the only semester course in the country that deals with African cinema. And we have for 20 years. So like, it's our thing. We do it at MA level and a third year level. No one else is doing that. So students who are learning about, West African cinema from the 1970s and 60s, and they're learning about South African film in the 1980s. They're doing it through us, and that's the boiler, that's the foundation of the way in which we teach film. So I think the value to some extent is not to constantly emphasize skills over theory and history and critical thinking, because ultimately the students are going to make better films because I always feel that our students make good films because they're grounded in courses in philosophy and history and politics and sociology, and the best films that our students have made, you can see all this evidence of that in the work that they're doing. And they're not always going to go necessarily into the commercial sector. They might end up in the strangest places doing NGO work or doing work for corporations or companies or whatever, making great documentaries, so like that's, and in postgrad we only focus on documentary. Why? Because no one else does. So I think part of the education thing, and it's not like us blowing our own trumpet here, it's just that, because you need that diversity as well. I love the fact in Cape Town, if you want to study film, you can go to AFTA, you can go to City Varsity, you can go to SAE, you can go to UCT. You're going to get a different background in all of them, and my hope has always been that all those students doing those cool things, which often does happen, is they're all on one another's WhatsApp groups. It's like, dude, I'm making a film, I need so-and-so. Cool, there's a guy at SAE, he can do that for you. He's the sound guy to get. And they will collaborate and produce good work together. So I think what film schools need to do is that it isn't really, I don't see us as being in competition with AFTA, for example, because we're doing a totally different thing. There needs to be way more openness and collaboration between schools about this, because we're all struggling with the same stuff as well. We're all underfunded. We're all expected to do more with less every year. So we should be like recognizing that. And I also think part of the thing is we should keep teaching. I think history is so important. Like we need, there's so much content, and that's another conversation, but like it's so valuable for students to get that context and to get that experience of like, this is how storytelling has evolved and changed, and these are the kind of cultural conditions for it. So I think that is the kind of big thing for me around how to teach film. And it doesn't matter if they're going on and become feature filmmakers or YouTubers, they're all going to draw on that in different ways. And they might not do it immediately, but they're going to start doing it in their 30s. You know, that as you get older, that stuff's going to start percolating. You think, oh, that was the value of all that stuff I did. And often I have students who say, like, I don't know how to do this, but when I was 28, I had to write a thing for, you know, DSTV, and like I thought about the thing I had to do when I was like in third year about like doing it. So I think that's the long tail of what we do. Yeah.
I think Ian, sorry, nerd.
Yeah.
I think Ian is also very much describing my experience as a filmmaker. I would say definitely my voice strengthened as a filmmaker when I understood that I have to incorporate my African studies knowledge into my filmmaking and charge my development with the academic sources that I've been gathering and really making the research as fruitful as possible. And I think that that's a beautiful thing that at least UCT offers. The one thing that I want to counter with, though, is that while we absolutely have this like serious wealth of knowledge and history sharing, there is also that like small window for the UCT kids to get into the practical space. So for me as a film tutor and as a film lecturer sometimes, I always try to encourage the students that are in front of me to make those connections and to use what they have. I think for a very large percentage of young filmmakers and even established filmmakers, the imposter syndrome and needing to, or feeling like you need to have permission to do certain things and tell certain stories. You really don't. You really, really don't. All you need is community and passion. At least that's my woo-woo answer. But yeah.
You actually answered my next question to you, but I think we can expand a bit more. So basically, what practical steps can one take graduating from film school? You are a product of the CFMS. Like with this wealth of knowledge that you have, what practical steps can I take to remain authentic to what I've learned, and also be and also still
baby?
What are we? Yeah, and still be like.
Girl.
We can still be relevant in terms of like a global perspective. Like earlier the panel mentioned like short attention spans and what can we do to make sure that this wealth of knowledge is true, and we can also provide for the attention rate generation.
I'll answer in my capacity. So I made a documentary, Ode to Sarah, and my second documentary that's starring Diana Ferris talking about Sarah Baartman's return. I'm also in development there. But for the first one, I found super interesting that I just, at the end of my master's, I was just sitting with this crazy wealth of knowledge and like way too much information that I couldn't even express in that 15-minute documentary. So literally, I started making a TikTok series, and you can find it now. I started making a TikTok series, a sort of Instagram series about my research. It was born out of the fact that I was busy looking for jobs. I'm still looking for jobs. Hire me. And I needed something to make me feel like I still had a voice in the industry. And at least in my small way, sharing that information about Sarah Baartman and the reception that it's got, the type of people that it's brought to me has been so amazing. And I'm realizing also that the path is not linear. I think I always knew that, but now I'm feeling it. Like the path is going to take you where the path is going to take you. And the mentor that believes in you is seeing something in you that you don't even see in yourself yet. But taking those steps, making those leaps, and pushing yourself as much as possible. I think there's a fear sometimes to be cringe online and social media wise and whatever. I'm cringe as hell, and I love it. Like I'm just sharing all my knowledge, and at least it's going somewhere, and I can see that return, you know.
And I just want to jump to Sean. I'm going to ask you this question. Basically, the stream is now reshaping this format, having new format. Like you said earlier, Netflix has a certain type of format that they like. How can South African creators avoid being just
it's a big question because people need to live and people need jobs and so there's an appetite for Netflix and for Netflix's content, and people need to be making it. People love it. And people love making it, right? So I think, I mean, thematically, I think we've all been saying that a healthy industry is a diverse industry in every single sense of the word, and that obviously South Africa must be represented in who's in the industry and in what type of work's being made, but then also it's diverse in what roles are being filled within that industry. And there are people who are writers, directors, grips, cinematographers, journalists, critics, podcasters, lawyers, thinkers, academics, teachers, institutional people who provide the frameworks for festivals, audiences, and so a healthy industry is what that allows for people to find their niche and find the most meaningful role that they can play in that industry, which may be a development exec at a Netflix who comes in with a fresh idea of what sorts of storytelling this particular incarnation Netflix, because it does change every couple of years, will look like, or multi-choice, because you're right, I'm not going to stick to Netflix. Multi-choice is being very adventurous right now. Showmax is being very adventurous in the types of stories they're telling. And so what, I think the healthiest version of the industry is one that allows for the most different types of films and TV to be made, different types of story to be told by a whole range of people, fiction, documentary, TikTokable channels, and then like 3-hour wrought art films that are going to be watched by 10 people, but my God, do they have an impact on the cultural lexicon or the thought process of the country? And then get to go to the world and show something different. And this sort of speaks back to, again, like the lens that a European audience or an American audience may have. And so a Netflix audience based in the States or Brazil or Germany may end up having a very particular type of idea about the sorts of films that we make in this country, and I do think that might be like a stumbling block. And so then the onus is on us as industry to try to figure out how to take other types of stories to those audiences then where possible. So it might be putting, like, a Criterion channel which has just picked up Millie Sotando, which is an excellent documentary, and that's going out to a totally different audience globally that's looking for something more artistically focused and also something that's very interrogative of apartheid and about the country and the growth that we've been through. So if you can watch Unseen and Heart of the Hunter and Bad Influence and Millie Sotando, then great, then I think suddenly you're getting a much more rounded idea about what sort of work's being made in the country. And then watch Mayfok Maralise as well, just to get like something totally different. It's obviously like easier said than done, but a healthy industry also needs people who are executives in those companies and also distributors. Companies like Indigenous, Gravel Road, Indigenous, who I've worked with a lot, they've put a lot of time and effort into developing very artistically credible material, also very commercial material, and then selling it to Netflix, to Showmax, and also making sure those films go to festivals and find those right kind of audiences. So the life cycle of an industry is there are filmmakers, there are financiers, there are lawyers, there are distributors, and everybody in between who all need to be sort of kind of collaborative in making those projects successful.
Yes, so we've developed a small film fund in the city to try and support local film as much as possible. And how I know the industry is very alive and starting to bounce back very strong is in our first, it's a very small film fund. We had 78 different applications, all on Cape Town based, whether it's documentaries, long form, short form, all different, but 78. This past year, that was last year, this past year, we had 180 applications, all in Cape Town, all different types of things. So that's really encouraging to see that is, and it's in various stages of development, but it's actually happening.
I want to stay with you, Leonora. When we think about this international thing, we always think like Hollywood and all this stuff, but we forget the other African countries. Maybe you can comment on this. Do you see is there enough collaboration between South Africa and other African countries?
So I don't think there is. I really don't think there is, and it's something which we discussed during Fame Week. There was a discussion between quite a few different African territories and saying, year, hopefully before next phase, there'll be more discussions amongst ourselves. And also, what platforms do we use to distribute our material to in Africa, for Africa? And I just want to come back to something else when you say, what is success? And in the South African context. So there's this movie called The Heart is a Muscle. It's a South African story, but it's a universal story. Mental health, men's challenges, and all of that. That is now, it's been nominated for.
Yeah, it's a South African
It's been nominated for, is it an Oscar?
Yeah.
Well, it won't be yet, but it's our nominee, our submission for the best foreign film. Yeah.
But the thing is, that story, and I think it's Shimmy Isaacs and them that did that story, it's a South African story, but it's a global. And that is, I mean, I think if we can produce 10 or 20 of those, I mean, I think it's going to be great telling our stories differently and making it appealing. Also to the rest of Africa, I mean, I love the Bollywood movies.
Yeah.
I sit and I gobble them up.
Stunning.
You know, so I mean, it's really how do we start producing content in Africa for Africa? How do we do that?
I think we need an African streaming platform.
Yes, I've been agitating for that.
No?
Yeah.
So before I open up the floor to the audiences, to the audience questions, I just want to have a quick rapid fire round. It's 3 questions. Everyone is allowed to answer, or rather everyone should answer. So if the South African film industry wants to remain globally competitive, what must it change? What must it improve upon? And what must it never lose?
Sean.
Never lose.
And our ability to tell stories. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's historical, it's indigenous, the way that we tell stories and share stories.
I don't think we have to worry about being global. I mean, I think there's this constant emphasis, like, we've got to be global. I'm thinking it's going to happen anyway, in a sense. Like, I don't think that all of a sudden there's going to be a situation where we're going to, like, stop watching stories from one country. Like, I mean, like, we are in a global environment. It's the given. There are going to be fluctuations based on political events. I mean, South Africa definitely, you know, if you look back at our broader cinema history, there's a watershed of 94, and we're definitely way more known about, and our stories are, you know, if in the wake of I think about how many films have been made about Mandela or about sort of new South African sort of identities. So I think that's the problem. I think what's more, it's not about how do we do that, it's more like, as you say, what do we keep? Like, what do we make? And we keep our South African identity, but we also keep our regional identity. Just going on that point about South Africa, I remember doing research a while ago. There was a Zimbabwean filmmaker who was an anti-apartheid activist in the 80s, and he said the irony for him was that under apartheid, with the non-aligned movement, he was making films with Mozambican editors and Ugandan cinematographers, and he was Zimbabwean, there was a guy from Tanzania, and he says that the moment, like, post-94, that all died. And when I dug into it, one of the reasons why is if you look at the SADC sort of development protocols, there's not a single word in there about arts. It's all about trade and about tariffs and about freedom of border. There's not a single thing dedicated anywhere in the SADC agreement around arts. And South Africa all of a sudden becomes this dominant economic force in the area, and we ironically lose what we had under apartheid, which is this kind of regional collaboration between Angola and Mozambique and so on. So I think that very much is something that we should develop more. You know, the fact that Lesotho is making, like, when I was doing a review in Lesotho in 2018, the last cinema in Lesotho had closed. There were no cinemas in Maseru, you know, and yet despite that, students have, you know, people, there are filmmakers that have come out of Lesotho, so Lesotho's kind of got an identity now because of a couple of films, and that should be nurtured. It shouldn't be like competition. It should be like, that's part of our regional identity, which is like super important, you know.
If I can add as well, the one thing that I think we need to invest more in is African film festivals. And particularly I'm working with the Raw Film Festival based in Khayelitsha as the festival manager, one of my many freelance jobs right now. And I find that it's so brilliant. We have films from Tanzania, we have films from Egypt, we have films from Malawi and mainly South Africa, and also showing films from Khayelitsha itself and giving Khayelitsha creatives a platform to share their stories with touching that international industry. For me, I think I've seen just so much value. I previously participated in the festival, and it really helped honestly boost my ego and my confidence a little bit as a filmmaker, just to be like, oh yes, I am regarded as, you know, just giving people that in, even if it's that small in, keeping things local as possible. And also, I wanted to say, because you reminded me when you said permits, I was working on a crew once, and half of the crew was this other side, international, European, I think they were Portuguese, I'm not sure. But basically they wanted to shoot in the most iconic locations in Cape Town. And we were getting small permits here and there, whatever, going through sandparks. And then it came to book up. And they didn't understand why the technical in wasn't easy. They didn't understand that they had to speak to the leaders of Bukav and speak to the community people that hold its sacred history. Because I think from their perspective, they just saw colorful houses and they were like, oh, that part. So it's for me, I think we need to, as much as we do need that international funding and that in the cross-continent, the pan-African sharing of resources, of distribution, of market share, like all these things that make films successful, I think needs to be amped up. And at least for me, African film festivals is the in for that, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something, sort of picking up, there's something at looking at different African creative hubs that have been super successful. West African films produce some of the best cinema that's ever come out of this continent. And, you know, apart from at UCT, where I'm sure we watched Tuki Buki back when I was here, you know, which you still teach it, you know, that, and it's still one of the greatest African films ever put out into the world. But every year there's there's such a strong crop of West African films that come out, East African cinema, Kenya, Ethiopia, and we don't, apart from festivals, get exposed to those very often. So I think as South African filmmakers, it's sort of upon us to go out seeking those bridges. Dakar has a great series festival, Dakar series. I was lucky enough to be there last year. Durban Film Art, which I'll give a shout out to, is an excellent hub going into its umpteenth year now, and they have really built up a framework of collaboration with African filmmakers and films, and in their film finance forum, you have a super broad spread of African films being pitched in their talent campus, where I'm one of the mentors. It's actively bringing in filmmakers from across the continent, introducing to each other, encouraging network collaboration. And then I guess the onus is on us to figure out how to strengthen those bonds and make them commercially viable, and then also take them out to the world. I think that's something about specificity that Ian brought up as well is so important. You don't grow an industry by trying to play the world at its own game. And I think we're very guilty sometimes of trying to play Hollywood at its own game. And we'll do the, you know, we'll stunt cast, and we'll tell our South African story, but we'll put an American in the lead role because we think, and there's a version of that model that does work for a certain type of film, where the sales company will dictate, if you want to make X amount of money, you've got to put Taye Diggs in your lead role because that's how you crack that market. You know, the onus is on us to go, well, number one, we're appealing to our audiences at home and making films that feel honest. I like the word authentic because it's a buzzword, but honest, films that feel honest, and stories that are honest, and then find their algorithms and expand from there. And I think like the South Korean industry has done that so well. You don't have films like Parasite, which is a South Korean film through winning the Best Picture Oscar in a vacuum. That's 20, 30 years of an industry that's grown by making films for its own audience with immense pride, and then harnessing its technical know-how, its amazing actors, its amazing creatives and storytellers, and then has naturally, organically found its way to the world. And I think there's learnings in those kind of industry models that we can incorporate into South Africa that will help us to grow on our own terms.
This is the last question, guys. In one line, any story based in South Africa, what would that story be?
My story. Right now, I'm in development of making because my final thesis film was about the return of Sarah Baartman, but I'm developing right now a memoir piece specifically on Diana Ferris as a poet, writer, activist, because her life and her story is insane. So I would happily fund mine. Yeah.
I'm going to go left field and say, like, I've always been fascinated by Moshoeshoe. Like, there needs to be, like, of all the great, like, military, governmental, political leaders in the past 300 years, like, he's one of the best. And he's this fascinating historical figure in Southern Africa. He's got such an incredible story. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, there needs to be, and not like a kind of sort of Shaka Zulu style thing, but like there needs to be, he's such a fascinating figure as an African leader, and not as an African leader by force, but an African leader by consent and by negotiation and by politics, that like he's like scandalously underrepresented in media. So yeah, that would be me.
Yeah, I would say we've got a lot of real life political thriller. There's just so much in the last 30 to 40 years of like the transition of the country, the liberation of the country. And I think a lot of the time we hesitate to get into the weeds with it. And I think there's some really great political thrillers that are rooted in the real history of this country. And I think there's I think there's a lot of good territory to mine there. So probably something.
So Clarence, like I said to you, I've a purview into a lot of applications. And I'm not necessarily agreement with most of them, but I'm telling you, it's great stories that's coming. But one that I'd like to see is the story about William Makeba. From here, out there, back here. You want to talk about African story with global affairs.
Exactly. Yeah.
I had one last, I had a comment I wanted to say, and it's really important because it actually pertains to an earlier panel as well. I just want to finish with it very quickly. I was lucky enough to be on an international panel with a guy called Tom Gunning, who's like a literary film theorist, and I was like nerding out completely. And I got to ask him a question in this. It was in Korea, and someone asked him a question about AI, which we haven't covered, which I'm happy about. But what he did say was this: he said the original power of cinema from its earliest days was its encounter between the camera and reality. He says no matter what you were filming, no matter what the genre was, there was an encounter between the camera and what was in front of the camera. And he says you lose that with AI. And I think one of the most important things that I'm seeing with students and with filmmakers is they've got to think deeply about that encounter. Like what is happening in front of, when you turn the camera on, like what are you doing? Like all the decisions you take before you get to that point. You know, there's a rush nowadays to just, as Sean says, content, like my least favorite word. And like think about the encounter. Like if there's one word, it's my word of the year for my students is encounter. Like encounter reality, encounter what's in front of the camera, whether it's a documentary or a fiction story or a, you know, whatever, and think about what that encounter really means. And then you're not going to need the AI stuff. You're not going to need all that other stuff because you figured out what the encounter means, whether it's a personal story or not. You know. So I really think that I can't stress that enough. And I think it goes back to the radio thing as well, about talk about discussion, about conversation with real people. You've got to figure out what that encounter means.
I think at this moment, if there's any questions, just put your hand out, and I don't know if we're gonna. Are we good?
I'm fine. I don't know. I'm just chill.
How much time do you have? So very quickly, Martha Evans and I actually worked on done quite a lot of work on archives, digital archives in Africa in our research. It's obviously a key issue in the wake of the fire at UCT and the effect that's had on archives. Like one of the biggest problems with the archive in general is it's going to become more and more important because everything is archivable, so the volume of stuff, like finding things in the archives, is a bigger and bigger issue, you know, and then deciding what you choose to keep, because you can't keep everything. I think the biggest problem with access has always been control, like, you know, to what extent users in the global south are subject to rules and guidelines and agreements of the global north. The hope has always been, and also the problem is that because something's in the archive doesn't necessarily mean it should be used. So we also have to deal with the idea that stuff in the archive, if you just make everything open, it's also open to abuse. People can abuse the dignity of people who are in those archives. In New Zealand, for example, at a conference there, they have very strict rules. You have to get permission from iwi to use footage from their particular sort of family or group before you use it in the film. Like, and so they actually advocate for restriction, not access. So I think, you know, like in one broad philosophical sense, you can say, well, you know, we need to think carefully about why one's using the archive and what it's for. But I think your problem of access, like the simple answer is like, we need to have better agreements in place to do that. And those agreements, unfortunately, are, I think it's changing, and Amanda could probably speak more to that. But there is a sense where, like, the more attention we are now paying to archive through policy, through study, through research, hopefully my optimism is that that'll shift the conversation on how we access those. But I think once we have access, we need to also take very seriously the ethics and how archives are used, because I think there's another part to that story as well.
I really like that point as well, Ian. I think the main thing that comes up for me in all the different archives that I visited is that South African archives and African archives need more funding. They need more money to keep, store, digitize, distribute, put agreements in place that actually work for African researchers and filmmakers. For me, I have just been making friends all over the place. I am using my charm and my wit to truly, truly trick and let people know, like, this is for research, this is for me. I'm like not a university student anymore, but I am here because I love what I'm into. And through that, at least for me, like, I've gotten mentors from the Uncle Karim from the archives back in like 2021. I would spend like hours with him. I did an assignment assigned by, I think it was you guys. You put an archive assignment together for the master's class, and that was the moment that opened my eyes, and I realized how much there's so much to share from these archives, and so much that like genuinely has changed my life after seeing. Also, valuing the textile nature of film as well. That's something that I've always been obsessed with, VHS tapes. So for me, personally, I've just been trying to make as many connections as possible, and also getting into people's personal archives, because you wouldn't believe how many gogos and malumes out here are storing and harboring amazing, like literally news broadcasting that I can't find on the SABC, or that I have to pay so much to even get. So yeah, making connections as much as possible. At least that's how I've been managing.
Hi, my question is for Lubanda. So as like a black filmmaker, so I'm thinking of, like, you know, the kind of stories that Tyler Perry makes, you know, like that black pain, black struggle, you know. So do you think to what extent should we still be telling stories about, you know, black pain, black struggle, black trauma, because those are relevant stories, you know, and there are people who are living through those realities every single day. To what extent should we still be telling stories like that, and when do we now start just telling nicer or better stories about black people, like about black love, black joy, happiness, you know? So, yeah, like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have always understood myself as a gender-based violence filmmaker, as much as an activist filmmaker or an academic filmmaker. So for me, telling the story, particularly about Sada Bartman, I had to understand, number one, that because I share a likeness with her, and the black femme body being something that is so easily and has been so easily commodified and abused and told in this wrong way, for me, the answer to that is you can't stay away from the violence. The violence is always real and always there, But what we can put forward before we even get to the violence chat is the humanity. When I first started researching Sada Batman, I understood that all these literary, peer-reviewed, whatever sources that have been shared don't discuss Sada Batman pre-colonially. They don't discuss her humanity. I had to go into oral archives and really getting to know the Greek community, the Goy community, to understand that Sada Batman was a mother. She had a father that she loved. Her mother died when she was young. She was a community leader. She played the guitar. Like, so many amazing things about this woman, and she's always just reduced to her exhibition and her abuse. So for me, I find that as much as I will always have space and hold space for the violence, for the pain, I won't use that to promote the piece itself, like I feel like Tyler Perry does. That's like basically his whole appeal, is that you're going to see a black woman cry at some point in this film. No, that's wild. She's a human being. She deserves a range of story to tell her life. So thanks for that question.
Any more questions? If not, I guess we'll come to the end of our South African film and television panel. And I think from what I've learned is basically, again, I know you hate this word, but like stay authentic or stay honest, and realizing that you sometimes don't have to chase anything. Because I know in South Africa we have this thing, I think we were discussing in our table show yesterday, we chase after this new shiny things in South Africa. That we now developing this culture of like, oh, this is trending, we're gonna go in that direction. Oh, this is now trending, let's shift direction, and not really finding our own path. And I think that's where the conversation of having our own streaming service, like as Africans, we can start investing in that instead of going to Netflix's, your HBO's, whatever. I think that's what I can take out mostly with this discussion. And yeah, now it's gonna be our lunchtime finally. We're gonna take a break. Food will be served. I don't know where will the food be served.
I think a round of applause for the panelists.
Oh.
I think just going forward, there are pre-packed lunches, so perhaps I could suggest for you to go grab a box and then just
Okay. 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 1, 2, 3. Okay.